Now, regarding since it's all about China, so the latest we did get some information that China is evaluating U.S. offer to negotiate tariffs. China just said our door is open. So now the message we got is the U.S. has been trying, apparently through different channels, to contact China um, to get some kind of a negotiation start running, I guess. And to the degree now, China is saying, okay, we can evaluate, but there is no promise. What's your take on that?
I think that the Chinese will eventually agree to negotiations, but if I was them in this situation from a position of advantage, I would let the Americans sweat. And if you want me to tell you why I think we got that extraordinary, intemperate, angry comment, which, as I said, on the surface was about Iran, but I think was ultimately directed at China. I suspect that's partly the reason that Trump is furious that the Chinese don't just quickly say, oh, look, we're going to rush and negotiate with the Americans, whenever the Americans want us to. If the Americans say, we want to talk, we will immediately rush and talk. Probably that was what Trump expected. So he's very, very angry, and he's taking it out in this Truth Social post. But as I said, if I was China, that is what I would do. I would let the Americans sweat. I would give it a week or two, and I would say to the Americans, look, okay, we see that you want to talk. If you want to put forward some proposals, we'll look at them. And then after we've looked at those proposals, if we think those proposals are even worth discussing, then we might actually consider a meeting. But I certainly wouldn't rush into anything. And I get the impression that the Chinese are not rushing into anything either. I've dealt with Americans, by the way, in negotiations. This sort of bluster and threats and all of that, very typical of the way Americans do conduct negotiations. And as I said, the best tactic is to play it cool and to string it along. And I think that's exactly what China is doing.
I think fundamentally the problem with problem by large with America is they do lost trust with not just China but Russia, Iran. I think fundamentally that's all the problem. For example, if they say to the Russians, "Oh, we're not going to let Ukraine to get into NATO," what kind of guarantee do you have, right? You say it now. I mean, you change your mind tomorrow, and maybe the next administration. Why would Russia believe you? The same thing with, oh, we're going to lift a sanction on you, Iran, if you do this and that. Again, you can turn around and just saying, forget about it. We, change our mind. The same thing with China. We talk about this, right? There are so many times that China actually did give in and compromise and buying more and this and to show that China is serious. But then again, they make no promise or they make promise and broke it the day after, whatever, what have you. I think fundamentally, when the trust is broken, it is very hard to move forward, don't you think?
You're absolutely correct. Yeah, I mean, what you say is it puts the finger on why there is this great crisis in international relations, because at the center of international relations is a very powerful country which always breaks its word.
Yeah.
I mean, you're in every single case that you've described. Um, you've described the problem exactly correct. The Russians do not trust American promises that Ukraine will not enter NATO in the future, especially when European newspapers, are saying that an American official, who's probably General Kellogg, told the Ukrainians, "Oh, don't worry, we can agree this now, but the next administration will probably change its position anyway on this." So, which of course the Russians are reading. And of course, they know all about the whole promises about not expanding NATO eastwards that were made in the past. You're absolutely right about Iran. I mean, the Iranians made all kinds of deals with the United States. There was the JCPOA. There were the promise to lift sanctions. None of those promises were in fact honored. And with China, well, I mean, you know the history better than I do, but even I know how many promises were made and not honored. And perhaps the most important one, the promises that were made about Taiwan, about reducing arms deliveries and all of that to Taiwan, and about the one China policy, which it is now quite clear American politicians, political leaders don't believe in. So what are you going to do? I mean, how can you negotiate and come to agreements with such a country? And it is incredibly difficult and very, very all but impossible, given the power of the United States.
Britain, there is quite a few visits from the high-level officials. Just this year, January, there's Rachel Reeves, and she's the consular something, and then the Energy Secretary Ed Miliband, he visited in March, and then Admiral Tony Radakin, he just visited in April, right?
Yeah.
So, and then there's also discussion. Apparently, Starmer is considering to visit China later this year. Is there a shift for Britain towards China?
Yes, there is, but I mean, it's done not so much without conviction, but without any real idea or plan. So these are all very important people. So Rachel Reeves, I mean, we have this archaic constitution in Britain with all these pompous titles. So her title is Chancellor of the Exchequer. She's the finance minister.
Okay.
She is Britain's finance minister. Ed Miliband is the energy secretary, but his major job is to organize the green transition, the transition towards green energy. I should say Britain has massive energy problems. I mean, we're short of every conceivable kind of energy, but he is particularly focused on green energy, and of course, which is the leading country in green technology. It is, of course, China. And Tony Radakin is the head of the British Army. So all of these people are coming to Beijing. They all, at some level, understand that a relationship with China is important for Britain. I've discussed this many times. You remember, I've just talked about this in many programs, that Britain has a massive crisis of solvency. We have no money to invest in anything. The country that could do it conceivably is China. That was what the Cameron government sort of understood. That is why we had that so-called golden age of good relations between Britain and China. And then, of course, we threw it all away because, you know, we're going to have global Britain, we're going to ally with the Americans, and we're going to send battleships to the Asia Pacific region. We're, by the way, again sending battleships to the Asia Pacific region. Half our navy, 4 ships. 4 ships. that's what the British Navy now is. It's 8 ships altogether, and we're sending 4 of them. So that's really going to scare the Chinese. Anyway, being serious. We threw it all away, and there's some understanding that maybe we should reconsider and we should revive it. But nobody really has a plan how to do it. Nobody is coming to China and say, look, these are our industries. This is where we would like investment. This is what that investment might produce. This is how you might profit from it. Nobody's doing this because nobody thinks like that in Britain anymore.
Okay, so they're only thinking, okay, we're going to visit China, and possibly even Starmer himself will visit China without knowing exactly what they are going to do or discuss in details with China what they want, right? So
exactly.
Okay. Well, that's I don't know. How can you?
Well, it sounds absurd and almost funny. And from a Chinese point of view, it is funny because I live in Britain, and to me, it isn't funny at all. It's very concerning. But I mean, if you track this government closely, this British government closely, what you very quickly discover is that they don't have a plan. At least not a plan for Britain. And that's the other thing they're going to do, at least probably not Rachel Reeves and Ed Miliband. Of that group, by the way, Ed Miliband is by far the most intelligent and capable, and perhaps the only one who could conceivably engage China in the kind of discussion that I've talked about. Not that he will, because he's under considerable political pressure in Britain. But Radakin and Starmer, I can absolutely guarantee to you that the main topic they will want to discuss with China is Ukraine. That's what they will want to come, and they will say, "Yeah, why are you sending arms to Russia? Why are you supporting the Russians in doing all this terrible thing with Ukraine?" And the Chinese will say, "Well, we're not sending arms to Russia," and then then the British will get very cross and very angry, and then they will say, "Well, you should put pressure on the Russians," and all of that kind of thing. And I mean, that is more likely, I'm afraid, what they're going to end up talking about. Is Starmer never stops talking about Ukraine.
So you don't think there's a possibility that Britain can even consider to join the Belt and Road Initiative? You don't think so?
I would love to think so. I don't know. I don't believe it. I mean, I can't see any evidence of it. At the moment, Starmer is focused, our Prime Minister's focused on getting a free trade agreement with the United States. I think that he knows if he joined the Belt and Road Initiative, Britain joined the Belt and Road Initiative, that wouldn't happen. So I don't think he's going to do it. One thing he might be thinking, and it's a very, very bad and dishonest thing if it is what he's thinking, is that he might come to China, say that Britain is interested in joining the Belt and Road Initiative, and then run off to the Americans and say, "Look, give me that free trade agreement, because if you don't, I'll go with the Chinese." In other words, he might take a very manipulative approach, which you should never do. It's one of the biggest mistakes people make in diplomacy, in thinking that if you can be manipulative, that will gain you advantages. It never does.
I would think since they don't have any idea how to work with China, just maybe join the Belt and Road Initiative is a good way to do it, because then China have a stake in this. So China would have their own view of how to proceed. What are the infrastructure projects? What are the things that China is interested in doing with Britain? Then you start having a plan of some sort, right? That you can start discussing and start moving forward, since you don't have any idea yourself. Don't you think?
Well, I cannot imagine any better way forward than what you've just suggested. But I know the British political class and the situation here in Britain. I just don't think it's going to happen. I mean, just to say, powerful sections of the British political class are extremely hostile to China. The idea of joining the Belt and Road Initiative, of getting Chinese to start building our infrastructure, it would drive some people who are already borderline insane, completely insane here. And I'm afraid they've got traction. They carry political weight.
Yeah, you're right. Because when I'm reading some articles talking about the British and China relations, there's always this line that how to balance, human rights and with, development. They're still talking about things like that.
Oh, yeah.
Hong Kong, and come on, I mean.
Yes. Well, and those are the politer people. I mean, if you read somebody like Ian Duncan Smith, who was the former leader of the Conservative Party, I mean, his views about China are from a comic strip. I mean, they are ridiculous. I mean, they are. I mean, well, I'm not going to use the word about a fellow Briton, but I mean, they are absurd. I was going to use a very, very much stronger word. And if he was the only one, it wouldn't matter. But unfortunately, there's a very, very wide opinion within the British political elite which shares those kind of views. Not, by the way, against the British people. There is a large Chinese community here in Britain, and I'm sure you've heard a great deal about the tensions between British people and immigrants. It never ever directs itself against Chinese people. They're never bracketed with other immigrants in that kind of way. British people like Chinese people, and I mean, they get on with them at many levels. But anyway, there it is.
Last question. So Canada now had the last time we talked that we were saying that Mark Carney is expected to win. So now he won, and the Liberals now in control again, continue to be in control. So what's happened next to Canada? Because now it seems like Canada has a bad relationship with the U.S. So what's next for Canada?
Well, I mean, the logical and obvious thing to do is that given that Canada has a very bad relationship with the United States, it should look for other relationships and other friendships with other countries.
Yeah.
Russia, which is, of course, a neighbor. You always forget that, but Russia is a neighbor of Canada and has many shared interests with Canada. And historically, the two countries have had cordial relations. China, of course, as well, with which Canada had once upon a time excellent relations.
Yeah.
I mean, that is what Canada ought to do. I don't. There's a ghost of a chance of it happening. I just don't believe it. I mean, I know Mark Carney quite well. I mean, he was the governor of the Bank of England here. He was very, very political governor of the Bank of England. And he is somebody who shares all the conventional views that you expect from people of the political class. So yes, Trump is very bad. Tariffs are very bad. China is even worse. Russia is worse still. And I don't think he's able to transcend that. And I'm sorry to say this, I think we're going to get more of the same in Canada and the more worse decay. I gather conditions in Canada are not very good, and they're just going to go on getting worse because I again don't see any real sign that anyone within the political class in Canada is capable of turning things around or of thinking differently.
I actually want to ask you about Britain again. You're saying there are forces within Britain don't like, they just hate China, I guess.
Wow.
Of course, there are forces within Britain also very much hate Russia.
Yeah.
So the only country they like is United States, right? But this free trade agreement, isn't that has been going on for quite some years now, that even back in Johnson's time, he wanted to have this free trade with the United States. Is it going to happen then, realistically?
You put your finger on it again. You're doing a lot in this program, can I just say? One of the great absurdities is that the British, there's a section of the British political class which is intensely pro-American. When I say a section, I mean 80% of it, 90% of it. And they are convinced that because they speak English and the Americans speak English, there's some tremendous connection between Britain and the United States, and that the Americans value them and that they're Anglophile in that kind of way. I have to say that is not my own experience of America. I think that there is a fair amount of hostility to Britain in America for all kinds of good and bad reasons. So that's the first thing to say, much more than I think British people appreciate. I think that America and Britain are profoundly different from each other to a degree that, again, the British political class just does not understand. And I think the American political system and the political class don't think much about Britain at all. The idea that Donald Trump has any great anxiety to agree a free trade agreement with Britain is ridiculous. I mean, Britain isn't that important for him. I mean, he's got much more important places that he's thinking about. Greenland is more important to him than Britain is. I mean, it may be difficult for British people to understand, but it's true.
Yeah, we will see. When will Britain realize that that they're not, the Americans are not that fond of them? So, okay. All right. So let's talk next week. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.